Welcome to the explainer. So imagine you're right in the middle of preparing this huge, perfectly permitted meat dish. It's looking great, and then, boom, an accidental splash. A single drop of prohibited food, specifically milk, falls right into the pot. You're probably thinking, does that one tiny drop ruin the whole meal? I mean, how do we even measure the invisible transfer of taste? Well, today we're going to explore exactly how the sages measure this kind of mix using a really precise mathematical ratio. And as you'll see, this simple kitchen mishap actually sparked a highly dense analytical debate about the fundamental structure of Torah law itself.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. Number 1, a drop of milk. Number 2, the rule of imparting flavor. 3, the concept of a novelty. 4, Rava's counterargument. And 5, dinner table applications.
So, starting with section 1, a drop of milk. We're looking at the foundational text here that really sets up our baseline kitchen scenario. And the absolutely crucial threshold you need to know is the number 60. The text states that if a drop of milk falls onto a piece of meat, well, that meat becomes forbidden if the drop contains enough milk to impart flavor to that specific piece. But how do we objectively measure something like imparting flavor? It's subjective, right? Well, the text establishes a strict mathematical ratio to solve this. The meat actually has to be at least 60 times the size of the drop of milk to overpower it. If the meat is less than 60 times the size of that drop, the flavor of the milk is legally considered to be present and the meat is forbidden. Honestly, it's a brilliant way to quantify a totally invisible sensory experience like taste. Now let's account for the actual physical mechanics of cooking, because the text makes a really sharp distinction here based entirely on movement and time. Let's say a drop of milk falls onto an unstirred piece of meat just sitting in a pot. That specific piece absorbs the flavor immediately, so you measure that 1:60 ratio against that single piece alone. But, and here's the kicker, if you immediately stir the contents of the pot and that piece of meat gets submerged and mixed into the gravy before it can really absorb the milk, the math completely changes. Now the milk disperses everywhere, and you measure the drop against the entire pot's contents. Basically, stirring distributes the flavor, which literally changes the legal equation.
Moving on to section 2, the rule of imparting flavor.
Okay, so now that we've got a handle on the kitchen mathematics, our analysis is going to shift to a really deep theoretical debate initiated by a sage named Abaya. But to actually understand his argument, we first need to clearly define what a Torah law is. In this legal system, a Torah law is a primary, universally binding biblical commandment. We're talking about the absolute highest level of legal strictness here. This stands in direct contrast to a rabbinic decree. A rabbinic decree is more of a secondary, protective measure, something instituted by human authorities just to prevent you from accidentally violating a primary law. Definitely keep this distinction in mind because the entire stakes of this debate revolve around whether the rule of imparting flavor holds the ultimate authority of a Torah law. So here's Abaya's core thesis. He argues that the principle of imparting flavor, the idea that the invisible taste of a forbidden food forbids the permitted food it gets absorbed into, is a universal Torah law. He's saying, hey, this isn't just some protective rabbinic precaution, and it definitely doesn't just apply to meat and milk. Abaya claims that for literally any prohibited food in the world, if its flavor is present, even without its physical substance, it's forbidden by the highest level of biblical law, period.
Which brings us to section 3, the concept of a novelty.
Right, so to prove that imparting flavor is this universal law, Abaya has to clear a massive logical hurdle, the concept of a legal novelty. What's a novelty? Well, it's a unique law that totally defies standard logic. And the prohibition of cooking meat and milk together is basically the ultimate example of this. Think about it. Meat on its own, perfectly legal to eat. Milk on its own, perfectly legal to drink. But the exact moment you cook these two permitted items together, they become strictly prohibited. Because this combination behaves completely unlike any other law, it gets classified as a novelty. And the absolutely strict rule of legal logic here is this: you cannot draw universal analogies from a novelty. Why? Because a novelty is, by definition, an exception to the rules. But Abaya actually uses this hurdle to build an incredibly elegant logical proof, which is laid out right here in 4 steps. Step 1, he asks the fundamental question, is the prohibition of meat and milk really a novelty? Step 2, if we assume yes, it is a novelty, then we can't use it to prove that imparting flavor applies to all other foods, right? But wait, step 3. We just saw in our kitchen scenario that meat and milk relies entirely on the standard 1:60 measure of imparting flavor to even trigger the prohibition. It behaves exactly like standard mixtures. So, step 4. Therefore, Abaya concludes meat and milk is actually not a novelty at all. It follows standard principles. And because it's a standard template, we can confidently declare that the rule of imparting flavor is a universal Torah law applying to all foods. That takes us to section 4, Rava's counter-arguments.
So Abaya has laid down this masterful, airtight deduction. But then a colleague named Rava steps in to challenge the entire premise. The question on the table now is simple, but really profound. Is Abaya's proof actually valid? Did he successfully prove that meat and milk is a standard case, just because it happens to use that 1:60 ratio for flavor?
Well, Rava rejects Abaya's conclusion completely outright. He steps up and firmly reestablishes that the prohibition of meat cooked in milk absolutely is a novelty. He insists it is a unique, exceptional category that differs entirely from all other prohibited mixtures, precisely because it takes two perfectly permitted things and makes them prohibited.
And this brilliantly illustrates Rava's counter-logic. You might be wondering, how on earth does he explain the 1:60 ratio if the law is just a novelty? Well, Rava argues that the reliance on flavor here isn't because meat and milk somehow follows a universal law of mixtures. Actually, scratch that, it's simpler. It's due to the physical reality of what the Torah explicitly forbade. See, the Torah specifically forbade the action of cooking meat and milk together. And what is the fundamental nature of cooking? Cooking inherently involves the extraction and imparting of flavor. It's just what cooking does. Therefore, flavor matters here not because of some grand universal legal equation, but simply because the physical mechanics of cooking dictate it. Finally, Section 5, Dinner Table Applications. Okay, we've navigated some pretty dense, abstract theory today. But how does this actually impact the person standing right there at the stove? Let's quickly summarize these two perspectives to really solidify our understanding of the debate. On the one side, we have Abaya, who views meat and milk as a standard template. For him, this proves that imparting flavor is a universal, fundamental Torah law for absolutely everything. Then, on the other side, we have Rava, who maintains that meat and milk is a unique novelty, a total exception to the rule. For Rava, flavor is only measured here because the physical act of cooking naturally forces flavors to blend. It's amazing, really. We have two brilliant minds analyzing the exact same drop of milk, and yet they arrive at completely different understandings of the legal structure. But practically speaking, what should you take away from all this? Well, the source text leaves us with some incredibly practical guidelines for those inevitable culinary accidents. First off, time is totally of the essence. You've got to act fast if a drop falls. Second, your actions matter immensely. Stirring the pot right away dilutes the drop before a single piece of meat can absorb it all. Third, the volume of the entire pot can literally save your meal, provided it's big enough to meet that strict 60 times threshold. Ultimately, it comes down to this. The physical mechanics of cooking directly dictate the legal outcome of your food. We're going to leave you with this final thought. We saw today how a simple kitchen ratio, 60-1, opened up a massive debate about what constitutes a standard rule versus a unique exception. If legal novelties defy standard logic, just like Rava argued, it really makes you wonder, how many of our everyday rules, whether in law, in society, or even just in our own personal habits, are actually just exceptions in disguise? It's definitely something worth thinking about the next time you're standing there stirring a pot. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and we will catch you next time.